In the last episode, I was actually quite pleased to be able to explain what Naruto's life was as the Nine Tails. That being said, not much changed other than Naruto really befriending Kushina, but that wasn't enough to really change Naruto's situation. After all, through the seal, he has almost no connection to the outside world, so we can't expect that the world would change all that much. But Kurama now. Kurama has more of a connection to the outside world, and the question remains, how will Kurama react to this world? And how can Naruto's actions help Kurama? Are we destined to see the world crumble as Kurama loses his mind? Or will we somehow pull this off and drag Kurama into heroism? I suppose only the future holds the answer. So instead of just sitting here and speculating about it, let's get into it, shall we? Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you are subscribed, and with that out of the way, let's get into the video. If you're expecting a story that starts with tears, you can look somewhere else. The protagonist doesn't cry. He doesn't yield. The protagonist is a king among delinquents, and that's the honest truth. In an alleyway somewhere among the trash, there sits a throne symbolic in nature, the king of all trash. That's what he's known as, and he's not the only one. Very few people realize the darker half of Konoha. There's a corrupt underbelly that nobody seems to talk about. During the day, the children play, but during the night, drugs and prostitution are pushed through the city. In a village where most able-bodied young men are warriors, have witnessed war, and are constantly fulfilling their duties, they tend to fall to pleasure and vanity when their shift ends in hopes of finding some form of fulfillment. Kurama was no exception. He, along with the other gutter rats, formed a little posse. A gang of sorts. Rat company, that's what they call themselves. A bunch of children with nowhere to go. Without a normal life. Orphans, young but free. And sitting upon the throne is the strongest and boldest of the children, Kurama himself. By his side he has many others, including Yusuke and Josuke. These two were his main right-hand men, two fraternal twins whose parents died in the Nine Tails attack. Despite this, they don't seem to hold any ill will toward Kurama, but a respect instead for his strength. He cares for the orphans of the village when Konoha doesn't, and while doing just that, he's also making a killing. They were going to live like kings. They only recently had begun muscling their way into illicit goods. Word had come in that the Gato Company, a company that had long since brought goods into Konoha from the Land of Waves, was also dealing in drugs, hiding it in the various ceramic wares that they were importing. The selling of this to the people, as well as the pushing out of the Gato Company, would result in an increase of funds that could afford the orphans a better place to meet than in some back alley. Kurama had his eyes set on a warehouse toward the edge of the village. There, they could set up shop for business officially, as well as have a place to stay. But to do that, they would need to wait for a shipment to come in, and according to the manifest that Josuke had snatched while he and Yusuke were casing the joint, they knew one was coming in tonight. Kurama stood from his throne. "Show me what you got, boys," he said. The kids brought out a box and opened it. There was a grouping of weapons, kunai stolen from the academy, along with shuriken, all sharpened to perfection. Kurama lifted one of the blades up and touched its tip, trying to gauge its sharpness. He was content with this. "Good. Now get what you can carry. Enough to survive, but not enough to slow you down. Remember, we're not gonna make a scene. We go in, get the goods, get out." The kids around let out a resounding "hi" to tell him that they understood. Taking up their weapons, they waited for night to fall. They saw the gates open and the wagon train coming in. They saw two Konoha guards walk up to the carts. The head driver slipped the guards each about 2,000 ryo each. The guards looked one way and the other, took it, and signed off on the cargo, letting the train go by. Kurama and the others sat there, waiting for quite some time, letting the wagons continue down the road until they reached the warehouse. They stopped. A man with an eye patch and tattoos got off the head wagon and began issuing orders to the others. They began to unload the goods. Kurama and his little group began to make their way down the side of the hill silently. They came up to the fence that was separating them. "Is it electrified?" Yusuke asked. Kurama would reach down and pick up a long blade of grass. He would lay it over the fence. Also, I likely need not say this, but don't try any of this stuff at home. An electric fence can kill you dead. Do not do this stuff. This is all make-believe and is not a safe way to test an electric fence. Entertainment purposes only. Feeling no buzz, Kurama assumed that the electric fence had fallen under disrepair. Reaching out with a finger, he touched the fence and found there was no shock at all. "It's dead. Snip it." They began cutting the wires. Once a big enough hole was cut, they began to sneak through. Keeping low to the ground, they moved to the nearby shrubs to hide themselves. They kept watching from the darkness. They began to sneak through as the cargo was quickly unloaded. Frankly, Kurama was surprised how quickly they managed to unload the cargo. He would sneak into the warehouse with the others and make his way up the stairs to the upper catwalks where they would keep low and just watch from there. As it looked like the warehouse was secured and empty, they began to make their way down. They walked over to the goods and proceeded to untack the crates. Inside were some ornate ceramic pots and vases. Kurama lifted one up and looked inside. There was nothing, of course, but he didn't expect there to be. He knew that the illicit goods were baked into the pot itself. Musashi and Kojiro are gonna have to separate it for us, but this looks like it. Kurama sniffed it. He had always had a good sense of smell, and he knew from the odor that the drugs were inside. Okay boys, start loading this up. We're blowing this place. They began to pick up the vases and start making their way out. On their way, however, they accidentally dropped one. It broke with a loud crash. Kurama stopped and looked around. He waited quietly for a moment and didn't see anything. He began to signal that they should continue, and so they kept pushing on. As they reached a door, they opened it to find a man on the other end of it, an eye-patched man. He pushed them back inside. What do you kids think you're doing here? He then saw the pots and vases. It all clicked. Oh, you kids thought you were being slick, but you've messed with the wrong group. I'm gonna skin you alive. The man plucked his katana from its saya. He would swing it at them only for the group to move back out of the way. Kurama would pull out 2 kunai and hold them in each hand. He would start issuing orders to the group. Yusuke and Josuke would spread out a bit as the entire company began to circle around the man. Nice try, but you kids aren't anything compared to me. I'm a fully trained samurai. You're nothing but a bunch of children. Kurama sneered. I'll show you who a child is. Good try, kid. Waraji would then suddenly sheath his blade. Is he giving up? Kurama asked. No, Josuke said. He's preparing an attack. Watch out! Suddenly, Waraji dashed forward at Kurama, unsheathing his blade once again to strike him. Kurama would catch the blade with his kunai, but the force of the strike would send him flying back, landing on his side. As he reached for his kunai, Waraji drew closer. Josuke and Yusuke would attempt to cover for their leader by throwing shuriken as well. Waraji jumped back to avoid the shuriken. As this happened, Waraji would turn and swing his blade in the direction of Josuke and Yusuke. The 2 boys fell back as shallow wounds opened on their bodies. Kurama stood. I've had enough of this. He began to fold his hands in various signs to perform a ninjutsu. Waraji would begin moving his blade in various kata, creating a vortex of wind. Kurama would begin to blow his flames toward Waraji. To be honest, Waraji was surprised. Tended to be that people off the street, unless taught, didn't know many jutsu, especially at this young age. But this boy did. He knew a fire-style ninjutsu and was proficient enough in it for Waraji to be struggling a bit. While this was going on, Yusuke would sit up and throw a shuriken. It struck Waraji in the shoulder, disrupting his movements, allowing Kurama's attacks to make it through. The blast struck Waraji and sent him flying back. Hitting the wall, he fell forward, steaming from the heat. He passed out. Kurama then helped Josuke and Yusuke up and commanded the rest of their group to grab as much as they could carry and get out. They grabbed as many pots and vases as they could and made their way out toward the hole they created in the not-so-electric fence they passed through earlier. Making it back to their base in the trashed alleyway, they set the vases down carefully. The boys and girls of the group let out a hoot and a laugh at how close they were to being killed. But as Kurama sat down on his throne again, he declared that this wasn't the end of their escapades. They would continue to do this, taking more from the Gato company and reselling it on the market with a slight markup. As they predicted, the money started rolling in. Shinobi who were a bit more addicted to these substances than previously believed were willing to pay at least double for it just to get another fix. With their pockets being lined, they were on easy street. They weren't able to buy off that warehouse that they wanted, but they were able to rent a storefront that they left closed. All they wanted was a storage space and the upstairs home. Everything was going according to plan. They kept this up. It wasn't a one-time deal. When they ran out of cash or items, they would once again raid the warehouse. It was a humiliating time for the Gato family, to be outdone by a bunch of street urchins. Gato was not pleased at all. He sat in his fairly ornate office in the Land of Waves, sending for a particular mercenary. Haku would enter the room. "You sent for me?" he asked. Gato offered him a seat, which Haku declined. Gato began. "There's a group of kids in Konoha who think they can play with the big boys. I need you to go and set them straight." "What are they doing?" Haku asked. Gato then began to explain the situation. "One of our family's many sources of income is the trade of illicit goods in Konoha. But recently, these kids have been a thorn in our side. They've barely put a dent in our profits, of course, but such insolence makes us look bad, and that's not good for business. I need you to go and make an example of them. You and you alone, that is." Haku cocked his head. "Oh, you don't want to send Zabuza in?" Gato shook his head. Zabuza is many things, but he's not cheap, and another thing he's not is subtle. Considering that we're going into Konoha, the element of surprise is our ally. I need someone whose face has yet to end up in the upper echelons of the bingo book, so you'd be perfect for this job. Haku nodded. When should I head out, he asked. Gato pulled up a calendar. Soon. This village will be hosting something called the Chunin Exams. It's a sports festival used to determine if genin from hidden villages all over the world are truly ready to ascend to the next rank. It's often used like a military parade, where various villages display their true strength for the world to see. You, being young as you are, and skilled I would say, would fit in perfectly. You'll don Kirigakure markings and enter the village through the front gate. There you'll search for these children, and when you find them, make an example of them. Something very public, something very painful, something very fatal. Haku understood. And what will be the compensation for my time? Gato smiled. In the past month or so, the group of children has cost me 5 million ryo. Take them out for me and I'll pay you the same as they cost me. Haku smiled. It sounds like a deal. As the days passed, Kurama was able to get himself some better clothes to wear, and even bought himself a knife with his name engraved on the side. He was starting to feel like a real menace, like a true head of an organized crime syndicate. Currently, they were flying under the radar, but soon the whole world would know their name. As he walked down the road, the many store owners attempted to avoid eye contact. But the moment he entered any of their establishments, they would smile and offer him the best services they could provide. They, at one time, had been hostile towards him, treating him like a demon. He decided that if he was going to be a demon, he should at least be well respected and feared as a demon. It was through this that he decided to create his own syndicate. He found his other castouts and misfits and promised them a life beyond measure if they would follow him, and so far not a single one of them seemed to hate their current position. While their name had gained some notoriety, it afforded them respect. Business owners knew that if they didn't cooperate, they would be targeted for attack. That led Kurama to a new business idea he was hoping to institute. With the startup he received, he was beginning to become a necessary evil in Konoha that most shinobi turned a blind eye to. They needed him. They knew that without him, they would only suffer the throes of withdrawal. His territory was expanding, and now he was thinking he was ready to start taking out taxes on the people who lived there. This was the next step. Insurance. As shops were robbed by bums and thieves, Kurama's group would find the culprit and make them pay out their nose. Vandals would never touch the place again, and for a small bi-weekly tribute. And if they didn't pay, well, there would be some thefts and vandalism, particularly from Rat Company. With each passing day, their notoriety and power seemed to grow, and that meant at times even non-orphans would join their group. There were many reasons why. Perhaps they were in a bad household, maybe they suffered abuse, maybe they just needed companionship. Regardless, their gang was growing to the point that Kurama began to believe that their little storefront wouldn't hold them for long. They needed to make some changes, fast. They were growing so large that their current activities couldn't sustain them. They needed something new. That's why he was thinking of promoting some of the OGs like Yusuke and Josuke to captain and allowing them to make branches. The reason why these thoughts were in Kurama's mind were because of how close the Chunin exams were. They would soon enter Konoha, and with it there would be an explosion of tourism. This was their golden opportunity, their chance to make a killing, to become rich, to have all the pleasures life could offer them at their fingers. This is why he called for a meeting. Upon returning to the old building, Kurama would address all those who were members of Rat Company. As you know, our recent successes have been very lucrative. We've been making a bunch of money, and our notoriety has increased to the point that we're getting new members joining every day. This is a blessing to us that we should be grateful for, but it's also an ultimatum. We can't continue to run things the way we once did. We need to grow and expand. If we continue to do the things we've always done, we'll fall apart. That's why I'm happy to announce that we're going to be branching out. I'm going to be naming some new captains for our little group, who will function directly under me, and will be in direct control of their own pieces of territory, as well as their own business responsibilities. I will now name the new captains and their family functions. Kurama turned to his friends. Josuke, you'll be in control of collecting and processing goods we take from Gato. Musashi and Kojiro will be directly under you. He then turned to Yusuke. Yusuke will be over HR. His group will not only find suitable places for Josuke's group to set up shop to sell the goods we've collected, but they'll also be in charge of recruitment and personal housing. Then we have Butch. He turned to a rather burly kid. The strongest of us all, you'll be Enforcer. Your entire job is to collect debts. This means every other week you go to the various stores in our area and collect the tribute. If they don't pay, you're free to show them why they should. In the coming days, we'll issue directives to show which branch all of us will be under. What about you, Kurama? Josuke asked. Are you gonna have a branch? Kurama turned and nodded with a bit of a smile. There's something else I've been cooking up. And what's that? Yusuke asked. Kurama smiled. I was gonna wait until we were truly ready, but very soon we're gonna be open to handing out loans to people who are denied by the banks. Desperate people who will turn to anyone to get what they need. But we're not quite ready for that. We still need more funding. While it's important to grow and expand, we need to be careful not to expand too much or we'll spread ourselves thin. When we come into our own, then my personal branch will start work. Until then, I'm here to help everyone get settled into their roles and work out systems. The entire company began to let out a large hooray. But this was a more dangerous time for the group than they could imagine, as this was when problems began to become apparent. During one meeting, after they had adequately divided up the company into the 4 branches, Josuke would ask the obvious question. What are we gonna do when Gato decides he doesn't want us cutting into his profits anymore? Kurama sat there and thought about it for a moment. Josuke continued. They're not gonna let us steal their stuff forever. We need our own source. We need people who know how to get and or make this stuff. Butch then cut in. Not to mention that we're not the only organizations in this town. Oftentimes my crew's having to follow Josuke and Yusuke's crew around just to make sure they don't get jumped. And on the occasions that they do, we don't have the strength to handle it. Despite how tough we are, we don't have the strength to fend off well-trained fighters. We're just kids after all. And don't forget about the plants, Yusuke said. We're getting new members every day, but we're having to call them out a bit. Some of our recruits are actually spies for other organizations. Even one of them was an undercover genin for Konoha, meaning now the authorities are starting to get in our tail. Kurama hadn't expected this to get so hard so fast. Had they become overly ambitious? Were they really going to collapse under their own weight? Kurama shook free of these thoughts and spoke. I know these are issues, but we need to focus. The tuning exams are going to be starting in a few days, and when they do, they'll offer us a chance to expand. So what I need right now is a large raid. We need to get as much stuff as possible. We need to plan the biggest bust we've ever planned. Doing so will only cause us to get targeted more, Yusuke said. Kurama nodded. Yeah, but it'll also bring in a massive haul. And with Butch collecting the tribute, we might be able to afford real muscle, and even our own cook. Then we don't have to rely on Gato anymore. Yusuke sat there quietly for a moment. It's gonna be dangerous, he said. Kurama nodded. Indeed, but business is full of risk. If we want the biscuit, we're gonna have to risk it. Are you guys with me? Yusuke, Josuke, and Butch all looked to each other and let out a nod. Good, we begin preparations tomorrow. Kurama began to lead them out of their little storefront, but as they entered the lower half of the store, a chill entered the air. Wow, did our AC unit go bonkers on us? Someone get it back up to room temperature. Butch walked over and began pushing buttons. Nothing was happening. The temperature wouldn't increase. I guess we're gonna have to call a repairman tomorrow. It's a good thing it's summertime. If it were winter, we'd all freeze to death. Butch then went to open the door. When he did though, a pair of senbon struck him in the neck. Kurama, Josuke, and Yusuke all saw it and took cover behind the store shelves. They didn't see anyone. Yusuke called out in a whisper, Butch! Butch! There was no response. I really hope he's not dead, Yusuke said. Josuke then spoke. Either way, we're on our own. We need to look out for us now. Who could be attacking? Kurama peeked around the corner. Has to be Gato. Only he would send someone with such skill. For a moment, Kurama thought he saw something, a disturbance in the air, but he wasn't sure. He pointed around to the other side of the aisle. They began to look, and when they did, they saw what could only be described as a perfectly clear, glass-like figure moving closer to Butch. It knelt down and retrieved the senbon, which themselves then disappeared into a glass-like structure. What are we dealing with? Yusuke asked. Kurama wasn't entirely sure. This has gotta be a jutsu, he said. As they peeked around the corner, the figure stopped moving. Suddenly, 2 near-invisible senbon rushed through the air at them. The crew just barely avoided them. Kurama himself ended up getting cut across the cheek by one of the senbon. As blood dripped down, Josuke looked at him. Boss, are you okay? Kurama felt his cheek. Yeah, it just... What is it? Yusuke asked. Kurama looked up. It's cold. He then realized what was going on here. This user, he must be the cause of the cold air. He must be using the change in temperature to refract the light, which is why we can hardly see him. Josuke nods as if it makes sense. But what are we supposed to do about it? Kurama thinks. Well, we raise the temperature. It just so happens that I'm very proficient in fire-style jutsu. I'm gonna send out a fireball at it. Okay, Yusuke said. Just be careful not to hit Butch. Kurama weaved the hand signs and took a deep breath. He then appeared around the corner and released the breath as a blast of fire in the direction of the assailant. When he did so, there was a slight disruption in the cloaking mechanism that the enemy was using. Despite that, Kurama was nearly struck by one of the assailant's attacks. Kurama pulled back and looked over. Do you guys still know how to do fire style like I taught you? They nodded. Yes. Good. Light the place up. The 3 boys began to fold their hands in the form of jutsu signs. They then began spewing flames down every aisle. This caused the room to increase in temperature drastically, causing the cloak the enemy was wearing to fail. They saw a young man standing there wearing a Kiri Hunter Nin's mask. "Are we targets of Kiri now?" Josuke asked. Kurama shook his head. "No, that's just a hitman here under the guise of Kiri, likely to get into the village. We need to take them out." "What do we do?" Yusuke asked. "They have us pinned." Kurama looked over. "Use the aisles as cover. Get close and attack. I'll act as a distraction. Go!" The two boys went different directions as Kurama pulled shuriken from his holster and rolled out into the line of fire, releasing them. The enemy threw senbon out, colliding with the shuriken and deflecting them. A new volley of senbon were thrown at Kurama, with Kurama dodging out of the way. He would then light a few shuriken aflame and throw them back at his enemy. It was then that Yusuke and Josuke came around the corner and attacked the assailant. Despite the duo having the numbers advantage, this boy was powerful and well versed in taijutsu. He grabbed Josuke and threw him out the front door. He attempted to do the same to Yusuke, but Yusuke had practiced and managed to resist. Kurama rushed out to try and take Haku out, but Haku went low and pushed Kurama over his shoulder before throwing him out of the door. Haku would then plant senbon in Yusuke's vital points before throwing him out as well. Haku began to exit the building, dragging Butch out here. "I'd kill you now, but my boss has asked me to make an example of you," Haku said. "He wants it to be painful, humiliating. He wants to remind everyone what it means to cross him." Kurama stood up and growled. He'd never been so angry. "I built this organization from the ground up. I'll be damned before I let you destroy it." Kurama began to tap into something deeper. Deep within him, Naruto recognized that his Jinchuriki was in danger. To be frank, Naruto had long since stopped approving of Kurama's actions, but at the same time, he had made a promise to Kushina and Minato that he would always protect their child. And so he began to share some of his chakra. It was then that Kurama's chakra flared out a crimson red. Haku was surprised, as was Josuke, who was currently trying to get the senbon out of Yusuke, who was catatonic. Kurama rushed in toward Haku. Haku attempted to throw more senbon, but they bounced off of Kurama's aura, and the few that got through were knocked off course. Kurama would push Haku deeper into the building behind them and into the aisles where the battle had begun. His aura was hot enough to raise the temperature of the room so high that Haku knew he couldn't turn invisible again, and so he attempted to use his ice release to blow a gust of icy wind in hopes of freezing the room once more. Instead, he was met by Kurama releasing a blast of fire style that was so hot that Haku's own ice release didn't stand a chance. The store began to catch a flame and burn. The smoke rose up high, and the heat was so intense that it felt like they were standing in an oven. Josuke watched as the flames began to push out of the building. The mere force of Kurama's chakra was enough to cause the flames to strengthen. At this point, the building was starting to go up and was threatening to spread to other buildings. Josuke ran to Butch, grabbed him, and began pulling him away from the edge of the building. He would remove the senbon and revive him the same way he had his brother. The flames were so bright it was hard to see what was going on inside, but they could hear it. There was the sound of objects being thrown. Whether they were people or inorganic objects, Josuke didn't know. All he did know is that this fight was heating up, no pun intended. The fight went on for quite some time until eventually it grew quiet. Josuke began to fear that Kurama had been defeated, but his fears abated as he saw in the flames a figure coming through with the shadow of what looked like a fox's ears. "The nine-tailed demon fox," he whispered as he watched it. But as he passed through the flames, Kurama was in his human form. No more chakra surrounding him, only soot and ashes covering his body. Behind him, he was dragging Haku's body. He threw him out and let Haku scramble to his feet. "You tell your boss that we're ready for whatever he throws at us. We'll never give up. He'll never break us. I have more fresh cans of whoop-ass to open, and most of them are spicier than this. Get out of here and never let me see you again." Haku began to rush off. "Why are you letting him go?" Josuke demanded. Kurama looked over. "He's beaten. He won't be our adversary anymore. I want him to carry a tale and let everyone know exactly who and what Rat Company is. No matter the challenge, we overcome." As the night passed, the fire didn't wane. Ninja began to start putting the flames out with water style, and by this time Kurama and company had left the area. They would later regroup outside of Josuke's base of operations where they would rest. The day after, Kurama would make his way back to the storefront where he'd begin assessing the damage. Standing out front was all he could do as there was no longer a building to enter. It was all gone. Kurama let out a sigh. "I think I'm gonna rethink our strategies." "Perhaps I can help with that," another voice said from behind him. Kurama turned around to see a man in a full suit, wearing glasses and leaning on a cane. "Who are you?" he asked. The man seemed shocked. "You don't recognize me? You've only been terrorizing me for the past couple months." Kurama then understood. "Gato, you're the bastard who sent that hitman." Gato nodded. "In the flesh." Kurama drew closer. "You've got a lot of nerve showing your face around here. What's to stop me from making you swallow my knife through a new mouth I'll put in your throat?" Gato smiled. "Maybe a business proposition." Standing there, Kurama was skeptical of anything this man had to say, but intrigued by the concept of an alliance with one of the biggest crime lords in all of the Land of Fire, Kurama listened. Gato spoke. Haku's one of my strongest mercs. The way you sent him packing with his tail between his legs made me rethink our position. Your group is strong. Your group is well organized for a bunch of runts. So instead of destroying you, maybe we can reach an agreement. I'm listening, Kurama said. I'm willing to let you take control of the illicit trade industry in Konoha. And in return, you're to give me 50% of everything you make from doing so. 50%? That's a big number. Gato nodded. Indeed it is, but the benefits outweigh the cost. You will get an unlimited supply of goods to sell and your group won't have to steal it either. That I will provide freely. I will supply as much as the market demands, and in return, I ask for 50% of all proceeds from it. Kurama was silent for a moment. Gato then spoke again. It's not a bad deal. Truly, how much money you make is only limited by your imagination, and in return, I'll even offer you one of my henchmen to help out. Gato whistled. Haku then appeared before them in a kneeling position. Kurama looked down at him and then back at Gato. What's this supposed to be? Gato then explained. This, my boy, is a member of my payroll. If you keep your end of the bargain, he'll be at your disposal. He's easily at least Chunin level, and will be more than happy to even instruct your enforcers on the usage of various ninjutsu and taijutsu techniques. It'll increase the potency of your fighting force. Think of it as a goodwill token between you and me. All you have to do is accept the terms of this agreement. Kurama thought about it. And all you ask is 50%. Gato nodded. I'll ensure that you have an unlimited supply of phases to sell. Far more than you've ever had. I'll even throw in one of my warehouses. This is business, my dear boy. Sometimes you have to make friends with your enemies, because in so doing, you'll make more money than you could have ever alone. And I feel like you would do me better as an ally than the enemy you were. What do you say? He held out his hand. Kurama looked at it for a moment and thought about it. Could he really trust Gato? Perhaps not, but he didn't need to trust Gato. All he needed were the supplies. He could only benefit by working from him, especially now during the Chunin exams. Not to mention, he would also get a boost in his enforcement area of the family. Kurama smiled and gripped the man's hand. You got a deal. Gato laughed. My boy, I'm going to make you a kingpin. By the time we're all finished, Konoha will be under our control. They moved into the warehouse fairly quickly. With the resources offered by Gato's syndicate, they were easily able to keep afloat and even began putting out loans for people who needed it. And as the Chunin exams wrapped up, the people were subjected to a terrorist attack. It seemed that Orochimaru, an old missing nin, had reared his ugly head, seeking revenge. Despite the tragic nature of the situation, Kurama couldn't help but see opportunity in everything. He would begin helping to rebuild, offering loans to those who had lost their businesses. Konoha was struggling to keep up, with people's livelihoods at risk. They didn't have time to wait, and that was where Kurama and his men stepped in. With a little extra funding from Gato's group, they were able to start issuing loans. The Rat Company crime family had basically become a branch of Gato's syndicate, and this wasn't entirely a bad thing. While they may have not been entirely their own group anymore, they were still Rat Company, but now they were shaping into some real Yakuza. Things were going good. But the one thing Kurama hadn't expected was that there would be repercussions to opening that door for Naruto's power. Naruto was now capable of reaching out to his subconscious. Kurama had broken down that wall, and in return, Naruto was now free to speak with him. Every night as he tried to sleep, Naruto called out, You know this isn't what you're destined to do. Kurama shook his head. No, you don't get to decide that. I'm on the path I'm presented, and I'm dominating. Naruto told him no. I knew your parents. They wouldn't want this for you. If they wanted anything more, they would have been there for me, Kurama shouted. Your parents died protecting you, protecting the village. Kurama would hear this and scoff. Seems to me like the village is more important to them than me. If that's how it is, then so be it. I'll take their precious village and make it my own. Consider it compensation for the way this village treated me. Naruto sighed. This is not how I expected Ashura to react. And that's where I plan to call it for the day. What do you think? I felt like taking this one off the beaten path. Being a fan of the Yakuza series of video games, I couldn't help but imagine that Kurama as a human might just turn into a fully fledged mafioso. What did you guys think about that turn of events? Let me know in the comments. I'm excited to hear what you think. And if you have ideas about where the story should go, feel free to drop them down below. I'm always open to suggestions. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when more videos like this drop. And while you wait for those, try out these other awesome videos. Until next time, peace out.